Hello everyone and welcome back to the Football Analyst. So today we'll be looking at the match between Arsenal and Manchester City. Now this match had big ramifications on the title race, as we all know, and City came out winners 4-1. Now the match really started on City's terms at the beginning. They pressed really well and played through Arsenal's press particularly well and led at halftime 2-0 and then scored shortly after halftime. So we're going to be taking a look at how they built up from the back and worked through Arsenal's press, and also how they pressed Arsenal as they attempted to work out from the back, and also the first 3 goals that they scored. Because after the first 3 goals, it was pretty much over. Arsenal managed to nab one back, and then City scored again, but pretty much after the first 2, it was over. So we're going to take a look at how they moved from the back third. So we're going to look at their starting formations to begin with. So both teams started in a 4-3-3 with both their natural number 10s in KDB or Kevin De Bruyne and Martin Odegaard playing, further up the pitch, sort of near the striker. Odegaard seemed to float in a number 10 position, and then KDB, moved or operated close to Haaland, fairly close to Haaland, maybe a touch in front of him. This worked well, better for City than it did for Arsenal. City had a much better press and were able to negate Arsenal getting the ball into Odegaard. Gundogan particularly picked him up as he was on his side. Now in terms of the back third possession, City would often try to have Odegaard commit forward. So if Diaz had the ball, he would hold onto the ball, he would wait with the ball, and he would almost suck Odegaard into pressing him. Otherwise he would just sit on the ball pretty much. And this left space really to get the ball into Gundogan. Oftentimes he would go via Akanji, who was playing on the left, and they would get the ball into Gundogan that way, and then they would be off with the ball, and they would advance through midfield. After a few minutes of doing this, Arsenal pretty much, Partey got sick of it, and he started to press up. Arsenal wanted to press really assertively at the beginning, and what this meant was that there was lots of space for Kevin De Bruyne to receive the ball in midfield. You can see the space afforded City between Arsenal's midfield line. You can see the 4 here, and then the 4 at the back as well. So there's lots of space, and they really utilise this. Haaland had great hold-up play. Oftentimes he would get 1v1 with a centre-back, and they'd shoot the ball into him, and he'd be able to hold it up and flick it off to Kevin De Bruyne, which actually resulted in the first goal. But this was very effective for City. So we'll take a look at a few examples. So as we can see, City would hold onto the ball. Diaz has the ball here. We can see Odegaard is reluctant to press, but eventually he does shift towards Diaz. So this meant that Partey here, so Partey decided he would move up to Gundogan so as to not let him get the ball eventually. But you can see the space this is left because Saka's up on Akanji. And Grealish has held his position on the wing. He stayed very deep, and it's meant that De Bruyne can get the ball. A clever pass from Diaz can get the ball in this area, and they're past 5 players. Xhaka's back here. He's holding back. He doesn't actually. Xhaka's there. That's Gabriel. He's holding back because Haaland is creating a lot of trouble for Holding. Holding couldn't really contain him. And so Gabriel's trying to help Holding, and this has meant that there's a lot of space there for De Bruyne. No one's really going with him. So the ball's played, and De Bruyne gets it, and off they go. He's got a lot of space to work into. I think in this example, the ball actually gets turned over, but you can see how many Arsenal players is left behind. He's in front of Partey. Holding's had to come across. If De Bruyne lifts his head up, maybe he can find Haaland with a long ball through, but in this case, he doesn't see him. Another example is, again, Diaz draws Odegaard up here. The ball is, switched across to Stones. And then you can see the big space which is left here because Partey's had to go up on Gundogan on the previous possession with Diaz. The ball switched, lots of space because Partey's up here on Gundogan. And, Stones can play into Silva, who's moved up from the wing. So Silva collects, as we know, flicks the ball to Kyle Walker, who's come inverted. And then he's passed it through to Haaland, who's in a lot of space also because Partey hasn't recovered to his natural number 6 position or pivot position in defensive midfield. We can see that De Bruyne is already on the move. You can see his body shape. He's already on the move, anticipating Haaland's going to be able to get the ball to him. and Saka's not really covering that movement. This is just another quick example of how they were actually able to get the ball into Rodri or Gundogan. The ball's played from Diaz as Odegaard's pressed Diaz. It's played to Grealish on the wing, and he's able to just flick it to Rodri, who's able to move the ball forward. We can see in this example, Partey has actually decided to stick with De Bruyne, but of course this has left the space for Rodri to receive the ball and advance it forward in midfield. And you can see, they've got very good representation on forward areas. They've got De Bruyne, Haaland, Silva. If Xhaka comes across, it's a simple pass across to Gundogan from Rodri, or he can pass, take the ball forward, carry the ball forward there. So a very promising position. I think he decides to go backwards, but very promising position for City. And they were able to really pass through very easily in the first half with this. This led to them dominating possession pretty much for the first half. Now on the flip side, with Arsenal in possession, City's press was very effective. Arsenal struggled to play the ball out from the back. City would often man mark Arsenal's players, but they would generally leave Holding free. That's something I noticed. They would leave him free and try to put him under immediate pressure when he received the ball, or they would just force him into being a playmaker, which he was not very comfortable doing. Oftentimes he would just play it back to Ramsdale, who we all know what happened last match against Southampton. He had that blunder trying to play the ball into defensive midfield, which led to a goal. So he wasn't very confident either. And they were almost enticing Holding just to play a simple ball back to Ramsdale, and then they would squeeze up and try and force these two players to be playmakers, which they weren't comfortable doing. Now, in this example, we've got great representation from City. Grealish is marking the right back. Haaland's taken up Partey. Rodri's moved up on Zinchenko. You've got Gundogan here sweeping midfield, watching Odegaard. And Silva's taken Xhaka. De Bruyne's on Gabriel. You notice they've left Holding wide open. They didn't really go and press on him. They allowed the switch to Holding. They wouldn't allow it to Gabriel, but they would allow it to Holding to try and force him into being a playmaker. As you can see, he ends up receiving the ball and passes it to Ben White, who's, I wouldn't say is a natural playmaking right back either. And, Grealish presses really well. They've still got great man-to-man coverage in midfield. And he ends up having to just dump the ball out, trying to look for Saka, but it falls short. And Gundogan is able to pick the ball up, and they've got a counter-attack in the forward third, which is very dangerous. In another example, we can see that they've again left Holding free. They've got great representation again in midfield, picking up all the, natural passing options, short passing options. Grealish has been very good at blocking off the down the line pass, and Ben White's been forced to play back to Holding. As soon as he plays the ball back, Haaland is off. He's ready to press straight away, and that's what he did sometimes. As soon as Holding looked like he was going to get the ball, and they had good representation due to communication from behind Haaland, he would press straight away and try and force Holding to make a rush decision. In this case, he ends up playing the ball back to Ramsdale, who Haaland follows his run and goes to press Ramsdale. Again, because Ramsdale's a bit nervous about what happened last week, he is not looking for passes into midfield. That was one thing I noticed as well, which hindered Arsenal. Ramsdale wouldn't look to play or be very advantageous or aggressive with his playmaking. He generally just tried to kick it long or would pass to one of the centre backs, but you can see here Zinchenko's potentially on offer. If he takes a better touch, tries to be more assertive, he could play that into Zinchenko because there's nobody really picking him up. De Bruyne's anticipating a pass to Gabriel, which is what eventuates, and that's forced Gabriel into a tough position. He gets the ball, under pressure from De Bruyne. Everything's sort of cut off. If he tries to play it to Zinchenko, they're probably forced to go back again because Rodri's made up the ground. Silva presses the pass to Xhaka. Xhaka takes a poor touch because of this, and it ends up being a clearance by Gabriel straight out of bounds in City's forward half, which is again another forward half turnover, and another great example of a perfect press for City and nervous playing out from the back by Arsenal. In terms of the goals, City were able to create great separation in Arsenal's shape each time Arsenal pressed. In this case, Partey and Gabriel were worried about a ball into KDB, leaving Haaland to overwhelm Holding in a 1v1 with his strength. So this is just a map of the first goal. So the ball gets switched from Diaz to Edison, who kicks it to Stones. Stones hasn't got much options here. Odegaard's pressed him with Jesus. They're trying to really press deep into City's back half or back third. They've pressed up on Walker and Rodri. They can't really get out back to Diaz and Gundogan. But what's happened is it's left a lot of space in midfield. Kevin De Bruyne was very good at holding his position next to Haaland and working into the space rather than starting in there. So he would allow the space to be created, and then he would allow the player to put the pass there and have De Bruyne run onto it. So as we can see from this bird's eye view, we've got De Bruyne and Partey in midfield. The Stones is about to play the ball. It doesn't go to De Bruyne. It easily could have, and he would have been able to play it out to Gundogan. Instead, it goes straight to Haaland. But notice Gabriel. Now, I looked at this goal and I thought Gabriel was almost the one to blame as to why De Bruyne was able to just go coast to coast with it. So you can see he's nervous about the ball going into De Bruyne. He's moved up. Partey's not close enough to him. He thinks the ball's going to be played there, but he actually leaves Holding on an island, 1v1 with Haaland. And he's in no real position to support in case there's a spill of the ball. He's left pretty much 1v1, and Haaland's probably going to win that every time with his strength and pace. So as we can see, Haaland gets the ball. De Bruyne has just easily turned Partey around, so Partey's another one at fault. It's too easy for De Bruyne just to run past Partey. He needs to put some body contact on, try and check his run a little bit, and stick with him. Instead, he lets him go. Haaland wins this 1v1 against Holding, who can't deal with his strength and size. And we can see Gabriel, instead of starting in this position next to Holding, he's had to recover back to this position. And by that stage, it's too late. He can't get across and chop off this run from De Bruyne. Eventually, he does get across to the other side, but it's too late. He's in a bad position. His body position's facing the other wing, and all De Bruyne has to do is wrong foot him. And his class, he's probably the best number 10 in the world, or would be in the top 3. And it's too easy for him just to wrong foot Gabriel, run through, and the finish is just sublime. Now, in terms of the second goal, I really love this. This is a very veteran move. It's very unlucky for Arsenal, but it's brilliant by Akanji. And I wonder if this is something they've strategized. I've seen a few players do this before. But what Akanji does is he starts out here. He starts a bit higher, and we've got Stones and Akanji pretty much separating on each side of Ben White. Now, what Akanji does is he runs very aggressively straight at Ben White, and Ben White panics. And he tries to go with Akanji, thinking he's going to go straight. He's going to be the target, and he's going to go straight into the box. But what Akanji does is he goes straight into Ben White's body, gives him a bit of contact. Ben White's already off balance because he's seen Akanji's aggressive move. He gets hit and stumbles and pushes Stones back on side. So unfortunately, his right foot kept on Stones on side, and that's all it takes. It's a very veteran move, but very clever. I'm surprised I don't see more teams try and do this. Put a bit of contact on at the back post, because the rest of the Arsenal players don't know what's going on back there, and they're all in line, but Ben White has been pushed out and Stones is back on side. They'll probably never call a foul for this, so I'm surprised more teams don't do it, but very effective from Akanji. And then the third goal is in the second half. So in the second half, Arsenal went back to pretty much, a back four with Zinchenko playing a natural left back position, going a bit high, and it meant that Martinelli could come into midfield to try and help ball progression through midfield, because they were struggling a lot through there. As we can see, this was okay, but as we can see, City was still able to nullify a lot of possession. Silva just came in and tucked in. The winger would come in to pretty much track Martinelli, and you still had Rodri and Gundogan as the double pivots. Arsenal were trying to play through, but unfortunately they just couldn't to much effect. And in this case, a lazy ball back by Odegaard, and De Bruyne's able to capitalise, and it's 3-0 and it's game over. Unfortunately for Arsenal, they just couldn't quite hold up in a big pressure game. City have a lot more experience playing Champions League, winning titles recent years, playing big games, and Arsenal's players just don't have that. They're still very young, and unfortunately sometimes they just panicked, or they weren't in the game from the start. They didn't come out with the same intensity as City, and it sort of just fell apart from them. They just couldn't get into the game properly. But all credit to City. They were much too good, and they're clearly the best team by a long way, I think, this season. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the video and the analysis. If you have any comments about the game that maybe I've missed, or something that you've seen, please chuck them down below. And as always, have a great day.